Hi, and welcome back to another edition of NOYO Jazz. And we're going to continue today to talk about the 2/5 progression and things that you can do over those progressions. Because as I've said before, the 2/5 progression is like the words a, and the in the English language. You can say caveman sentences like cook chicken now without using the words a, and the, but it's nowhere near as sophisticated as the language that we use in everyday, speak. So I'm going to continue to show you different ways that you can utilize the 2/5 progression whenever you are improvising. So last session, we talked about 2/5 patterns, like, and of course, once again, we're talking about the scale degrees 2, 5, 1. So if you're in the key of C, to review just a bit, you would go to D minor 7, that's the 2, to the G dominant 7, that's the 5, to C major 7, and that's the 1. So once again, and then we also talked a little bit about minor 2/5s and its chordal chemical makeup and how it differs from the major 2/5. So the major 2/5, like I was saying, I just played, is a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7, or just G7, to a C major 7. With minor 2/5s, just reviewing here, it's not a minor 7 for the 2, it's a minor 7 flat 5. Or it could be called a half diminished chord. It's two ways of saying the same thing. So you have, for instance, so it sounds different. It's still, the roots are still 2, 5, 1, but it's a 2/5-1 in minor as opposed to 2/5-1 in major. So the difference is you have that minor 7, just like in the major 2/5s, but then you flat the 5. That makes it a half diminished chord. And then the good part is that the dominant stays the same. And then the 1 is not major, but it's minor. So to review again, in minor 2/5s, the 2 is a half diminished or a minor 7 flat 5. Dominant stays the same. There's the 5. Here's the minor 1. One more time. Okay. So we talked about different licks last time that you can play over these. There's a major 2/5, and then you can also go, there's a lick in the minor 2/5. Okay, so that's just licks that are based vertically, so to speak, within the chord changes. And a lot of them use the same chord tones. And if you want to go back and review that last session, go back to the May 3rd session. I believe that's session 4. Today is May 10th. We're going on session 5. And basically, we've already looked at the 2/5 progression in major and minor from a vertical standpoint, but now I want to show you things that are from a horizontal standpoint with some of the elements that we've already learned from past lessons. So I'm going to share this screen with you. Here we go. Bingo. All right, so now you can see jazz scales in 2/5 progressions. Okay, so we've already, in one of our first lessons, we talked about the modes. We talked about major scales, the importance of minor scales, Bebop Dominant Scales, Bebop Major Scales, Bebop Minor Scales. We talked about whole tone scales. We talked about diminished scales. We talked about altered scales. And we've talked all about all those things previous to this lesson. So this is very much a stair-step effect. I've made the analogy before that jazz improvisation is a lot like mathematics. I mean, you can look at algebra, but you're not going to be informed on how to break down those equations and solve them unless you're very, very comfortable with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So that being said, we are now going to utilize the things that we talked about that were so important previous. So if you'll look at the screen here, the very first part of this says modes, right? Right here. I'm going to highlight that. So that being said, you can see that we have a 2-5-1 progression, a major 2-5-1, and in parentheses underneath, I have highlighted the, I've highlighted the different kind of scale that you would need for each chord change. So let's go back and review. C to C in the key of C is Ionian. D to D in the key of C, no sharps or flats, is called Dorian. E to E in the key of C is Phrygian. F to F in the key of C is Lydian. G to G in the key of C, no sharps or flats, is called mixolydian. A to A in the key of C is called Aeolian. B to B in the key of C, and I'm holding up each scale degree, here's 7. B to B in the key of C is called Locrian, and then we get back to the octave, okay? So, that being said, one of the things that you can do is you can utilize those scales even in just partial ways, going up and down, little mountaintops, right? And whenever you see a D minor 7, such as this, a 2, right, of a 2-5, you can use that Dorian mode. And that gives, and notice that I didn't go all the way back down to D, because it's only 4 beats, right? So you just go for however long, you know, if that's one measure, then you've got 4 beats. So then we move to the 5, which you utilize the mixolydian scale. Notice that there are no sharps or flats, right? So now we're here at the G7. And now we're going to go to the 1, which is the C major 7. So when you put it together, we've already talked about licks, right, from last session, but now we're talking about scales and how you can utilize scales within these same 2-5 progressions. So you've got Dorian, mixolydian, Ionian. I'll play it one more time without detailing each scale. Now, you will also notice during those scalar little mountaintop exercises that you can use over the 2-5s that we're starting in root position. So if it's a D minor, we're starting on the note D. And then we get to the G7, the 5, and we start on G. And then when we get to the 1, the C major 7, we're starting on the root again, C. So back when I was doing this before, there was a reason. Right? It's because those are the notes you can hit in this beginning way of thinking about each chord change from a scalar point of view, right? that's a major 2/5. Let's scroll down and take a look at the minor 2/5, okay? Right, sound familiar? And just like the major, we're going to start on the roots, but this time it's minor. So it's that minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished, whichever you're more comfortable with. Right? And you'll notice that two of these are the same, or one of these are the same, the mixolydian mode for that G7, for the dominant, right? So that's the same. So you don't have to change anything that you learned from that major, right? Just to give them in perspective, I'll keep both of them right here on the screen. But for this first one, this D minor 7 flat 5, or D half diminished, you're going to use the Locrian scale. So what that means is you have to ask yourself, D is the 7, or the leading tone, of what key? And the answer would be E flat major. Because if you go up that E flat major scale, scale degree 7 is D natural. So you basically go up like you're in the key of E flat major throughout this whole thing that I've just highlighted, right? That's what Locrian means. It means you shift your mind and you see D, and if it's a D minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished, it means that you got to think scale degree 7. So what does that mean? And that means that's 7 in the key of E flat. So you're going to go. That's the Locrian scale. So when you see a D minor 7 flat 5, you can use that. And then we're back to G7, mixolydian, right? And now for C minor, this one, because the minor scale, it's a minor scale, you need to use, or a minor chord, you need to use that Dorian scale, okay? So C is 2 Dorian in what key? B flat. So you would go up that C scale with only E flat and B flat. Now we're not going up the whole scale, so you really only have this E flat right here. So that C in Dorian would be, and you put it all together, here's what it sounds like. So you could do it more as a slow thing, or you could swing it. And the idea is that you're comfortable at either tempo. So you can go. That would be at a slower tempo with a little bit of embellishment, or you could swing it. Right? So it works either way in either capacity. So let's get rid of these highlights. And the other thing we're going to talk about is the Bebop Dominant Scale within the 2/5 progression. So you'll notice that we have a 2/5 progression here. For the E minor chord, that's the 2. And then we have an A dominant 7, that's the 5. And then we have a D major 7, that's the 1. So, okay. Now, we're going to be talking about Bebop Dominant Scale. Now, that's something that we've covered earlier, so if you're not hip with that, make sure you go back and review those materials or that video. But what we're looking at here is the Bebop Dominant Scale. So that doesn't mean that you should use a Bebop Dominant Scale on the E minor and a Bebop Dominant Scale on the A, you know, like an E Bebop Dominant, an A Bebop Dominant, and a D. No. So when it comes to looking at a bebop dominant scale and using that horizontally speaking within a 2-5 progression, you look to the one dominant of all three chords. So you have one chord right here that's a minor 7. Don't worry about it. You got one chord here that's a D major 7. That's not a dominant, so don't worry about it. This, your 5, your A7, is your one dominant chord. So you would actually, let's review the A bebop scale, A bebop dominant scale. You have going descending, A, G sharp, you get the major 7, and then you get the dominant 7, G natural. And then it's straight down the scale. F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A. Right? So everything that we use within this whole 2-5 progression is going to be based on that dominant scale from the one dominant chord, right there, the A7. So those notes are what we're going to wind up using. Now, if you just do that straight, that's one way of doing it, but we're going to get to that in a minute. Utilize what you know. What notes are in an E minor 7 chord? E, G, B, and D. So let's start with the minor third, G, right? And that's where this lick starts. Now, all that being said, you'll notice from here to here is the bebop dominant scale. They've just switched around the C sharp and the A and the B to do an encapsulation turnaround. But if you just look at the highlighted notes right there, that's the same thing as almost as, right? So they just switch the A and the B at the very end. So there's your bebop dominant scale within the 2-5 lick. I'll play it one more time. Here's the chords. Okay? Now, here's the lick with the chords. So if you're swinging it, and now, if you're already comfortable with that, as I said before, with some of the 2-5 progression licks that we covered last session, you can add a little bit of bebop flair to it through gruppettos or little turns and twists, okay? So instead of going, right, you can add a little turn at the beginning. I'll slow that down just a little bit. So you can add in a little bit of that if you're going a little faster. Okay, so now let's take a look at another one. This one's a little bit easier, more laid out, but you have a rest at the beginning. So we have a 2-5-1 in G major. We have a major 2-5. There's the 2, there's the 5, there's the 1. So the lick would be on what dominant, bebop dominant scale? The D, as in dog, the D bebop dominant scale, because that's your one dominant chord out of all three of these progressions, right? Right. So let's review what that scale is. D, C sharp, C natural. Because remember, the Bebop Dominant Scale has both the leading tone, the major 7, and the dominant 7 within the scale going down. Then it's just the regular major scale. B natural, A, G, F sharp, E, D. And that's exactly what you have here. If you were to play each one of these notes separately, there you go. So now we're going to add 2 more, C, B, because that will lead us into the chord tone for the G major 7. So here's the chords again. Right? Here's the lick. Okay? One more time. So you could put a little gruppetto in that too, a little turnaround sort of thing to make it a little bit more bebop. And one more. We've got another Bebop Dominant Scale here. What's the one dominant chord within this 2-5-1 in B flat major? You guessed it, F7. And so therefore we would play the F Bebop Dominant Scale, which is F, leading tone, E natural, dominant 7, E flat, and then straight down the straight down the F major scale, which is D, C, B flat, A, G, and then F, which is exactly what we have here. If you look at all these scale degrees, that's exactly the F bebop scale. But we're going to put it over the 2-5-1 progression. Now listen to the lick. So you can play this slow and you can play this fast, and you can add gruppettos, you know, little twists as well. So right? Okay. Moving on. So now we're going to come up on the Bebop Major Scale, which is different than the Bebop Dominant Scale. Once again, if you're not tight with the Bebop Major Scale versus the Bebop Dominant Scale, Bebop Minor Scale, go back and review those materials, because that will help you in this part, okay? So once again, let's talk about what the Bebop Major Scale is, okay? You have a regular 5 plus a sharp 5, and then the rest of the major scale. So you've got C, D, E, F, G, which is your 5, and now you're going to add in the sharp 5, G sharp, and then 6, 7, 8. A natural, B natural, C. Right? Okay. So those are the notes in which we're going to use for this, which is utilizing the Bebop Major Scale. Now you'll notice there's not a 2-5 within this progression, right? It's only a C major 7. But what we're talking about utilizing here is, if you'll go back up, you'll see all these 2-5 progressions in major end on major 7 chords, right? like right here, and right there with a 2-5 in D. That's a 2-5 in G. That's a 2-5 in B flat. So instead of just ending on a half note, like what, or a whole note like this, right? Instead of just ending on a boring thing like that, which is totally an option for maybe one ride or 1-2-5, but you don't want to do that for every 2-5. So instead of doing that, when you get to a major 7 chord at the end of a 2-5 lick, right, like these, instead of doing that, here's something you can do which utilizes that major scale. So this is a C major 7, which means that you should use the C major bebop scale. But up here, you would use the B flat major bebop scale. And here you would use the G major bebop scale. Right? Okay. So here's one of the things you can do which utilizes those tones. Once again, that's C, D, E, F, G, just like a regular major scale. But now you're going to add in that sharp 5. And then 6, 7, 8. A, B, C. And it adds just a little bit of chromaticism. That's what we talked about before, right? So when we get to that, it would sound like this. So you kind of go up that scale, and then you keep going. And then you've got a nice little intervallic ending. So let's talk about that 2-5 progression. You could sit there and do this. We're gonna take on this 2, 5, 1. But instead of this, we're going to utilize the Bebop Major Scale lick, okay? So you've got and then this is where we're going to change, right? And we're going to go over here to. So when you start piecing together these pieces of the puzzle, you've got now it's starting to sound like a solo. And let's say you keep going back and you go. That's a little bit high. I'll do it one more time, and I'll do it just a little bit slower. So here's one of the licks that we learned. Right? So when you add it up together, so now you start to get some ideas as opposed to, or a continuation of ideas, as opposed to just holding on like a half note or a whole note. See how it just rings there? So instead of that, do something like that. A little bebop. Now, let's take a look at this other lick that you could do in E flat major. Oops, too much. And by the way, you could do this exact same lick. You don't have to just keep that for C major. If you want to do that lick in E flat major, A flat major, B flat major, you could do that. You just take that and then whatever it is, run it in all 12 keys. That way you're going to be tight in whatever key that you utilize that for. So now let's take a look at E flat major 7. So it's a a little bit busier, right? But if you need a challenge, this is a good one. So you go. You get the point, right? So there's your 2, your 5, and then when you get to the E flat, your 1, you can think of this lick if you like this one. And once again, that E flat major bebop scale is E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. There's your 5. Now you sharp the 5, B natural, C, D, E flat. And you'll notice that's why you have the whole bebop scale right there. So yeah, there's a little bit before, and then you've got a little bit after. But there's that exact bebop major scale smack dab in the middle. So when you add them together, all right. Now let's move on to B flat major. So B flat major bebop scale would be B flat, C, D, E flat, F, sharp the 5, F sharp, then 6, 7, 8, G, A, B flat. So we got that chord. Okay, so you would have a 2, 5, 1 in B flat, which would be C minor 7 for the 2, F dominant 7 for the 5, and then B flat major 7 for the 1. So that's the sound of it. 2. Right? Right. Okay. Now let's look at Bebop Minor Scale. So the Bebop Minor Scale is in C, C, D, E flat, there's that minor third, F, G, A, B flat, B natural, C. So basically it's just like a C dominant bebop scale, except that you're flatting the third. So those are the notes that we would utilize within this. And once again, this would be something that you would do, just like the major version, at the end of a minor 2-5. So you would have the minor, that's a D7, D minor 7 flat 5, or a D half diminished, to a G dominant 7, to a minor 1. So you would go right? Two, 5. Okay. Now you can get a lot more involved with the E flat minor, so a lick like this, that's a little bit busier. So that would be, there's the E flat minor, which would be E flat, F, G flat, then you have A flat, B natural, or I'm sorry, B flat, C, D flat, D natural, E flat. Okay, so your 2 would be an F minor 7 flat 5 or an F half diminished to a B flat 7 to an E flat minor. That's the sound. So you would go like, so again. So you get a lot of chromaticism going on because you have right here that D flat, D natural, E flat, and then it comes back around right there. So yeah, and I mean, you have some chromaticism here between the G flat and the F natural, right? And then you also end on that minor third. So it's a cool lick overall. I'll play it one more time, slowly. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, and. So, yeah, it's kind of a chromatic, busy lick, but if you're, like I said, if you're really comfortable on those keys, go for it. B flat minor, same sort of thing. You would just have to go C half diminished to F dominant 7 to B flat minor. So let's take that and look at the lick. Once again, B flat minor, bebop scale. You've got that minor third along with the major 7 and the dominant 7. So let's take a look at this lick. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Rest, rest. Yeah, so what you have here is this exact bebop minor scale, except that instead of going down to the B flat to end, it ends on the minor third. So that's exactly what it is. It's just a lead up in that first bar. So. My bad. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, again. So that's a cool lick. Now, we're going to talk about diminished scales because we've already talked about that's like a D diminished scale. So even though there are no chord changes that is a diminished chord change within any of these major 2/5s, you can still utilize the notes of the D diminished scale or the F diminished scale or the A flat diminished scale or the B diminished scale because they're all the same scale, right? Because that's what makes up a diminished chord, right? You can utilize the D diminished scale over that chord. You You can also do the F diminished scale. You can also do the A flat diminished scale. You can also do the B diminished scale. Or the same thing. So that same chord change. But that's just a review. But within 2/5, you can use those lines in a very hip way to get a horizontal idea as opposed to just vertical, right? Because we've already looked at 2/5s vertically in many of those patterns from the last lesson. So one really cool pattern that's one of my personal favorite patterns is you take the 2/5 progression and you start at the third of the minor chord. So if you're looking at a D minor 7, you've got D, F natural, which is the minor third, A, which is the fifth, and then C natural, which is the dominant 7. And that creates your D minor 7. So I always like to start on F, which is the third of the 2 chord, right there, that note. So let's just take a look at this. If the notes of the D diminished scale are D, E, F, G, A flat, B flat, B natural, C sharp, D. Then you can utilize those and you see some of them, not all, but just some of them. That sounds like a lick. And then it just walks up and then it does the exact same lick. And you could keep this going if you wanted to, but this is a small encapsulation. So it could just keep going and going and going and going and going. But for the sake of brevity, I've encapsulated it into just a 2/5 form for you. So it gets a lot of hip tones, you know. Just here in that G7, you get an A flat, which is the flat 9. You get a B flat, which is the sharp 9. And then you end on a B natural, which is the major 7. So it hits a lot of those color tones. You hit the minor third, so it allows the listener to know that you know, as an improviser, that you know what that minor third is, and you're hitting that minor chord, and then you're hitting all these hip tones, you know what I mean? And you end right there on a B flat because that B flat carries over as well, as does the A flat. So you start with an A flat, B flat, and you end with an A flat, B flat, which is hip tones for that G7, and then you end on the major 7, which is hip as well. So you try playing it. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Now I'm gonna just calm. Good. Now, let's take another look at one of these diminished patterns. And it's the exact same thing, just over the D major scale. So you've got E minor 7, A 7, D major 7. Same deal. So keeps going. Right? Same deal. So it's just, remember, there's 3 different diminished scales, right? So E, it's the same thing as the G diminished scale. Same thing as the B flat diminished scale. Same thing as the C sharp diminished scale. Same thing, right? So that's why you're able to utilize this in the exact same way. I'm giving you all 3 diminished scales within this same pattern. Now you. Again. Now you. All right. And now we're going to wrap up with the 3rd diminished scale, which is on the F sharp half diminished. I've changed it this one. F sharp half diminished, or minor 7 flat 5, to the B7 flat 9 to the E minor. So now this is a minor 2/5. So this diminished scale pattern can be utilized for major or minor 2/5 patterns, okay? So to get the sound in your ear, here's the 2. So it's a different sound. All right? Once again, this diminished chord can go on A diminished. Yeah. It can go on the C diminished chord. The E flat diminished chord. Or the F sharp diminished chord. Right? So keeps going. Right? So when we're using that, let's play it. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, and. You. Again, 2, ready, and. You go. Good. Now, let's take a look at whole tone things. Just in the instance of a tune like Take the A Train, where you may have like a G7 sharp 5. There's an augmented, chord, G, B natural, D sharp, dominant 7, which is the F natural. So it's just like, except you're sharping the 5. Right? So what can you do over that? Well, that's a great thing for whole tone. Remember, the whole tone is all whole steps. So how do you go away from just sounding like a scale instead of going like, well, here's one way. So we'll take it slowly. One more time. Right? Now you can also break up this into triplets, which is this second version right here. Yeah. Take that again. Triplet, 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 go. My bad. 1, 2, triplet, 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 go. 2 again and go. 1, 2 again, go. All right. So that's another way that you could use a whole tone. Another way is to just go straight down in groups in cells of 4. So this is the G whole tone scale. So if you start with a cell of 4, and then you go to the next note down, and you go another cell of 4, then you go down to the next note and another cell of 4, and one more grouping and a cell of 4. Then you actually end on octaves. So look here, you've got a G, and then you end on a G. But everything is a whole step. You've got G, F, E flat, C sharp. Then you've got F, E flat, C sharp, B natural, because remember, all the accidentals carry over, right? Right. Then you've got E flat, C sharp, B natural, A natural, in that cell. And in this last cell, you have C sharp, B natural, A natural, G. So if you were to look at this, you've got G, F, E flat, C sharp. So each one of the cells are representative of each note of the first cell. That's what's cool and symmetrical about the whole tone scale. So yeah. Now, this is what's cool about that, is that this lick works for A7 flat or sharp 5, B7 sharp 5, all the notes within the G whole tone scale. So it doesn't have to be just G7 sharp 5. You could also do the same thing for A7 sharp 5. Let's go to B7 sharp 5. C sharp 7 sharp 5. E flat 7 sharp 5. F7 sharp 5. So it all works, right? Okay. Now we come upon the altered scale. So what does that mean? Well, we've already talked about the altered scale, and this is the whole reason for that is, whoops, this chord change right there. Whenever you see a dominant 7 alt, right, then you can use the altered scale. And what is the altered scale? The altered scale is a scale that, remember back from the past lessons, it utilizes all the ways that, you know, any extensions can be altered. You have flat 9s, you have sharp 9s, you have sharp 11s. You can never have a flat 11. And you have flat 13s. You can never have a sharp 13, right? So it utilizes all those tones within it. And this is more advanced stuff, but I still wanted to present it out there in case any of y'all are, you know, comfortable enough that you want to utilize this. So let's take a look at this altered scale. You've got B minor 7, E flat 7 alt, and the alt part really just means all the things that you can do over it, right? And to the A flat major 7. So once again, let's get that sound in our ears. Okay. I'm going to take this slow so you can hear how each tone crunches and falls within that chord change. 1, 2. 1, 2. Yeah. So yeah, what you can hear is like, ooh, that sounds a little crunchy in that chord, and that's why. It's because you have a B natural, which is the flat 13 of E flat. You have an A natural, which is the sharp 11 of an E flat. You have your F sharp, which is the sharp 9 of the E flat, and you have, let me clear that up, you have an E natural, which is the flat 9 of the E flat, right? Yep. Now, let's take a look at this 2-5, which is D minor 7 to G7 alt to C major 7. So, now, let's listen to the lick. Ah, my bad. I'll play it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So do you hear those crunches in the G7 alt? One more time slower. And once again, note what you have right here. You have the A flat, which is the flat 9 of G. Then you have B flat, which is the sharp 9 of G. You have E flat, which is the flat 13 of G. And you also come back around to B flat again, which is the sharp 9. A flat, which is the flat 9. And then you end on the 5 and the 3 of the C major chord. So that works there. Now, those are two major 2-5s in A flat major and in C major. Now we're going to do a minor 2-5 utilizing the altered scale. Here's one in D minor, right? So you have E minor 7 flat 5 or E half diminished to A7 alt, which would be the 5, to D minor. Now let's listen to the lick. So what you actually have in this particular one, it's not utilizing every one of them. So you can utilize just a fraction of them. You don't have to utilize all potential. You don't, for instance, in the altered chord, whenever you come upon it, you don't have to make sure you come up with something that is utilizing flat 9, sharp 11, and flat 13. That's what this one does, right? That one used all 4 elements. When you got to this one, oops, it only utilized 3 of the elements, right? Because notice, this one used 4, oops, that one used 4, this one used 3, and now this one is only going to use 2, okay? So what you have here with the C natural over the A chord is your sharp 9. What you have here with the B flats are your flat 9. So they just repeat that. They kind of seesaw back and forth. Right? So what we have here is stacking 1, 3, flat 5, dominant 7 on that E minor 7 flat 5 chord. And then we're only going to use 2 things for that altered. So when you put it all together, it's a little bit slower. Yep. So these are different ways, once again, that you can utilize the 2/5. You can, if you're, and what this is it's projecting out tons of ways to look at something from different angles. So the 2/5 is very integral, no doubt about it, within the improvisational structures of jazz. So if you're a vertical thinker, then maybe you like that, right? Maybe those patterns from the last lesson were better for you. If you're much more of a horizontal thinker and you're more comfortable with scales, then maybe doing something like a Bebop Major Scale is a lot easier for you. The point is that what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're differentiating this so that whatever is more comfortable or clicks for you gives you that structure that you need. So don't forget to go through each of these, through the modes, and the Locrians and the minor modes. The Bebop Dominant Scales, whoops, right here through these 3. The Bebop Major Scale patterns that we went through right there. Then we have the Bebop Minor Scales, the Diminished Scale, right? The whole tone, and then also the altered. So hopefully this has given you some new insight, not only vertically from last session, but also horizontally in this session, all right? So once again, feel free that if you have any questions, all you have to do, or if you want to record some of this stuff and just send it to me and let me kind of say, no, you're totally on the right path, or no, make sure you slow that down, take your time, you know, get that really tight. Just email me, you know what I mean? I'm here working week after week, getting these things ready for all y'all, okay? So happy practicing, keep swinging, and make sure you stay healthy and wash your hands, okay? I'll see you next week. Take care.